Welcome to the Invisible Ink podcast. I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, Chief Financial Storyteller at Achieve. I've read some research that shows that the same negotiating techniques, and I would argue that this is a negotiating technique, that I come to you and say, hey, please introduce me to Mr. or Ms. X because they're a great investor, is received differently when a woman asks for it versus when a man asks for it. Are you seeing that? And if so, how can a woman founder overcome that inherent bias as being perceived as too aggressive, for example?
So that is true, that the same behavior done by a man and a woman can be perceived very differently. A couple pieces of advice. The first thing is, part of me just says, do it anyway, right? Because if you don't then send the emails, well, then you're definitely not going to get the introduction. So part of me says to do it anyway. That said, though, if you are getting feedback that you're perceived as aggressive, pushy, there are worse words that you can be called, then what I would say is that what sometimes people talk about like power, right? So think about the 3 V's: verbal, vocal, and visual. Verbal is what are the words that you're using? Vocal is how do you sound? And then visual is how do you look? I'm obviously speaking about spoken communication. If you are getting feedback that you're being perceived as too strong, do not dial down your strength, dial up your warmth. So dialing up your warmth tempers really a lot of strength. And so this is the reason why a lot of American presidents have dogs. It's hard to take away the power of the US president, but they dial up their warmth by giving them pets and taking photos with,
Babies,
holding babies. This is why politicians hold babies. And so what I would say is talk to people and think about how can I dial up my warmth across those 3 dimensions, and that will temper what can be perceived as aggressive behavior. But then part of me says ignore it and do it anyway.
Love it. So do you have specific tactical things that women can do that demonstrates warmth while not tempering down their power?
Yeah. So one thing is replace sorry with thank you, right? So as opposed to, I'm sorry, I know you're so busy, I'm sorry to bug you, replace it with thank you for taking your time and I know how busy you are, right? So that could be a very small shift that both dials up your power and your worth. I actually find that women founders know their numbers better. And the reason why is I think because women founders are held to a higher bar. There's a tremendous amount of data around job promotions that women are promoted based off of performance and men are promoted based off of potential. And so I think because of that, women founders, women employees, women business leaders often have to prove themselves before they are given the chance to go do something at the next level. You have to prove the case from an economic perspective. We cannot have people investing in women because it's the right thing to do or the socially conscious thing to do. You have to be doing it because it is the smart thing to do financially. And so we do know that women are more capital efficient. Women exit quicker. All these things, like showing the economic case of why this is so important to do. And also, frankly, you will have a diversity of ideas that you're investing in. And that's also good because diversification works very much in this asset class. And so I think those are the 2 things. Really push for it on the LP side, and then really make sure that men and women understand the economic benefit of investing in a diverse portfolio. The one thing I will say is I've noticed an increasing number of outbound emails to me that say, I'm a woman founder or I'm a founder of color. And I would encourage you to not lead with that. I think that it shouldn't be the most interesting and most compelling part of your pitch. And you want to lead with the most interesting and compelling part of your pitch.
So clearly being informed about valuation is a very, very big part of negotiating a good funding deal as a founder. But if you think about it, right, where do I get the data? I need to go to PitchBook or I need to go to some other really expensive source that because I don't have access to friends in the industry or whatever, I simply don't have access to that information, right? What actionable advice or suggestions would you have for women to get a better shot at a decent or fair valuations?
So yes, PitchBook and Crunchbase are very expensive from a paid resource perspective, but both of them put out a tremendous amount of free research. And they both do quarterly reports on the state of the market. So one you can look for is MVCA Venture Monitor. That is a quarterly report. But I would just subscribe to PitchBook and CB Insights daily newsletter, and then you will start getting quarterly reports, and then you will know exactly what the venture market is looking for. On top of that, I would just make sure that you are going to demo days yourself, that you're going to pitches, you're seeing what's in the market. Have a core group of 3 to 5 investors that you're close to who know the market, where you could ask them, does this feel fair? Does this not feel fair? Talk to other founders as well, male and female, right? And so I think that these days, the data around what valuation looks like is pretty prolific and pretty available to everybody.
What you're telling me is almost that the founder's ability to convince an investor is in fact a lever to scalability, because that opens the doors to more funding, which then helps her overcome what might have been fatal barriers or insurmountable barriers, which I had never thought of before.
Yeah, when you're a founder and you're pitching to a group, you have no idea who's in the audience. You may think, like, let's just say this particular case. Let's say that this company really wanted to pitch to other doctors, people who really understood the problem because they had already encountered it in their own hospital or something like that. Well, that's great. But guess what? I could be just as passionate about it as another surgeon because you explained the problem to me and I'm seeing people are dying. That's what I care about. I care about this is going to solve the problem of helping people get past whatever heart disease they have. Well, what if someday that heart disease person was me or somebody I love? Well, so now I care about it even more. So like, it's just like explaining the problem, no matter what the problem is that a company is solving for, explaining that problem down to we're saving babies, we're saving humans, we're saving the planet. I mean, like all of these things, these are the things that investors care about. So while I don't have any medical training, I could relate to the pitch and what she was talking about because at the very beginning, she explained the problem so well.
Awesome. And frankly, it has even more validity because if you're a STEM founder, especially in technical fields like health or bio or clean tech, chances are that your investor, regardless of whether they're VC or angel, they're not going to be as much of a domain expert as you are. So it feels like it almost behooves you to be able to translate in very compelling terms why this is important.
Don't even make the solution until you've done enough customer discovery to know that your product or whatever it is that you want to make will actually be bought by your customer. You want to go out and talk to the potential customers and find out what they're using now as a solution. Would they change it? How much do they hate it, love it, whatever the story is? So customer discovery is so important. And a lot of times entrepreneurs, they don't necessarily like to do customer discovery because they think, well, I have this great, I know it's going to be great. I know it. But that customer discovery can be so important. I've actually watched founders go through a program, and you know the program, through Aspire, which is done by VentureWell, and they do an amazing job teaching entrepreneurs about customer discovery. And I've watched entrepreneurs start in the program, and they think that this is their solution, blah, 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 whatever it is, XYZ. And then they go and they talk to some potential customers. They start the whole process of customer discovery, and within a couple of weeks, they have completely pivoted and they have a different solution now because they're realizing, oh my gosh, my customer really does want X, Y, and Z together, but I can do that in an even better way that now they will change their behavior. So founding teams, there's like a love-hate relationship between founders. I need a co-founder. I want a co-founder. Should I get a co-founder? I'm not sure about this whole co-founder thing. I've seen solo founders do well if they surround themselves with the right advisors, the right team. Typically, having 2-3 co-founders is better. I guess in some cases it could be better because now you have different skill sets who have a lot of skin in the game of making this company grow. But one thing I will say is, let's say this company has 3 co-founders. I would absolutely, under no circumstances, split the equity at the beginning 3 ways. That just doesn't make any sense. I think what co-founders, whether you're 1, 2, 3, you're going to obviously bring on more people. You need to determine who is going to do what. You need to have the hard conversations early because it's a little bit like a marriage. So what happens if there's a divorce and one of the co-founders wants to leave? All of those kind of, oh, that's not going to happen to us conversations. It could happen. So have the conversations early before you really get too far down the road. Because I've had entrepreneurs come to me and they'll just say, oh my gosh, I'm having a terrible time with my co-founder. They're not doing anything, or I'm doing this and they're supposed to be doing, I don't know, there's whatever the story is. And then you end up with hard feelings. Oh, they have too much equity. I should be having more. All kinds of problems. So I really encourage founders to have the hard conversations early because it will matter about how you end up scaling your business. It's really important that as founders, you are all on the same page. And that does mean that things are going to change. They're going to evolve. You'll have to pivot. You'll have to do things differently. It might not always be the way that you dreamt it up at the very beginning. And that's okay, as long as you keep talking about it and you keep those lines of communication open. I really think that the CEO and the founders need to be the ones who create the financial model, even if they aren't the finance people. They can get help from the finance people to make the model look pretty. But I've seen too many times that a CEO of a startup will have their finance person, whoever that is who built the model, come on to an investor call, especially once in diligence. And the financial person is explaining the model and explaining the growth trajectory. And the CEO doesn't understand enough to be able to explain it themselves. So if that finance person who built the model isn't there, they can't explain it, which is bad. So you really, as a founder, CEO, you need to be able to articulate every single part of how you're going to grow your business. You don't have to be a finance expert. The financials aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. The financials are telling a story about how you're going to sell to your customer, how much money it's going to take, how many people it's going to take, how long it's going to take, all of those things. So if you cannot, as the CEO, articulate that story, then I don't have a lot of faith in your growth trajectory. If there are signs at the very, very beginning that there could be a problem, and then especially like to your point, if they end up on your board, that could just make your life, your life's hard as an entrepreneur anyway, because you're trying to do all these things at the same time and build a company at like lightning speed. And to have that kind of extra stress. So if you're having meetings with people and you walk away and you should feel energized after you meet with an investor. You should feel like, yes, this is the person I want helping me with my company and standing alongside of me as we go through this adventure together. If you're walking away from a meeting and you're thinking to yourself, oh, this is a little bit, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Okay, that's your red flag.
I think that the skills and the strengths that are required for somebody to be really innovative as a scientist or an engineer is a very different skill set than what is required to be successful as a business person or people person. And part of that is the level of precision and exactness required for that engineering and science. First off, if you're a technical founder, do you like the fuzzy people stuff where 80% answers are good enough? If you don't, then absolutely find somebody for whom that is and team up with them. If you actually like that kind of stuff, and there's a few people out there like that, then you can take over that role. But I don't think you can be both the technical scientific lead and the business lead at the same time. I really don't. I think if you are a technical person and you have both of those skills, you can choose which direction you want to be, but I don't think you can be both, because actually the level of work, the level of precision, the level of exactness required to make the technology or science work, the switch over to doing the fuzzy stuff like fundraising, not that fundraising is fuzzy, but fundraising is very people, very sales. The mind switch is too great. So I've worked with experimental physicists. I've worked with, PhD engineers. I've worked with PhD scientists, and all of them, the demands of those technical disciplines are so great. They don't translate well. And you can't go from in the morning, I'm going to spend an hour doing this, and then I'm going to do some sales, and then I'm going to switch back, because the level of concentration doesn't permit that. You really have to decide, what hat do you want to wear, and do you have the skills for that? And then find somebody else to do the complementary thing when you're talking about these technology-based high potential startups. If you're going to build a high potential business to a lot of revenue, you're going to need people who are out there hunting and selling, and you're going to need people who are making the technology and the science work. And you're going to need people who are dealing with the regulatory problems and dealing with the legal problems and dealing with the accounting problems. And all of those people are different skill sets. And you're going to have to bring all those pieces together. In fact, I was on LinkedIn interacting with somebody who was responding to my post, and they were like, solopreneurs, look at this Silicon Valley guy who says solopreneurs, AI is going to make it possible. I'm like, I don't buy it because AI doesn't solve the accounting problems. And if you're the guy that makes AI sing, you're probably not the accounting guy. And so, you may be the person who can make magic happen. And I've worked with some absolutely brilliant technologists, so brilliant. But every one of them didn't like that other business stuff. And so you're going to have to find somebody who likes that business stuff. And let's make no mistake about it. Fundraising is sales at root, at heart. It's finance, but it's sales. And if you don't like selling, and many technologists and scientists don't, then you're not going to do that well at fundraising. Even if you are profoundly passionate about your vision. Like I said, sometimes there's a little bit of fuzz at the very earliest stages for this. Sometimes people can raise, a few $100,000, but when you are trying to raise big money from large venture funds, you need to find somebody else or listen because they're probably going to bring somebody else in. I was on the call earlier this week with a VC that had asked me to be involved in talking to one of their potential investments. And then we were having a debrief afterwards. And the comment that was, they kind of have a weak financial model. They've got a really interesting solution. They've made huge amounts of traction. They've got a very technical founder and co-founder. And the problem is that it's not clear, whether they have kind of the right stuff to be venture backed. And I said, I think they can learn a lot of this stuff. But one of the things that was a demerit for them was the strength of their financial model. It was oversimplistic. I have a quite robust financial model that I end up working with. And I can tell you that you shut down that whole question mark when you have a really robust, strong financial model. I got to the point where it's like, well, let me send you a copy of our financial model. And that was the end of the questions. Because people were like, oh, they do know what they're doing. And that was the end of it. Whereas this conversation was, I'm not sure they know what they're doing. Because that's really on display when you don't have a grasp on their financial model. When you don't have a grasp on how the finances work together.
So to wrap up, if I had to ask you, you're talking to a first-time founder, she's never raised funds before. What would be the top 5 things that you would recommend she start doing Monday morning so she can improve her odds of building a successfully invested company?
I think the first thing is, if you haven't raised money before and you're just starting down this path, know yourself. Really think about, is this what I want to do? There are less risky ways to get a paycheck than building a company. Okay? Most companies fail. And you need to be careful how much of your money you put at risk. And you need to have the temperament, and your spouse, family needs to have the temperament to be willing to get into this stuff. It's going to be long-term. You can't see yourself doing this for the next 5 or 10 years. If you're not motivated enough to solve it, I wish it was shorter. I wish it was, the clips were like this. They're not. There never are. I know there are counter examples to that, but it's so rare to be successful. Like 90% of startups fail. It's like 0.000 become unicorns, which is $1 billion valuation startup. So you really got to be motivated by something other than, this is a great way for me to make lots of money. I hope your motivation, and this is what you want to check, is I really just need to solve this problem, because that's what's going to get you up and motivated every day.
You need to decide if you want to raise money, and if so, why do you want to raise that money and what are you going to do with it? Okay, so that's questions first, and we can go down that path in a moment. But talking about the difference between angels and VCs, let me sort of set the stage a little bit. Go back into the 90s and 2000s. Venture groups were putting in their first money, and they would easily put in $500,000 or $1 million. Okay. As we've seen it, in the 21st century, venture funds traditionally have gotten very, very large. They're raising $100 million. They're raising $1 billion. Okay. If you're going to pour that much money into a fund, you've got to deploy it in much bigger chunks. Therefore, VCs generally have moved sort of up the funding scale. So it's really hard to talk to many VCs if you don't want to deploy at least $5 million, because they have got to employ at least smaller ones, $2 to $5 million, and they're happy deploying 10. So what happened is the angels, who were originally might have been individual investors, but had grown dramatically in sophistication, particularly over the last 10 to 15 years, they have really filled in the gap. So there is virtually no difference today in funding level between an angel group or an angel fund and a micro VC. The key distinction is that angels invest their own money, VCs invest other people's money. So as a founder, what you're looking for in your early stage investors are people that, one, you like to work with, two, you respect, and three, can help you go further. So again, if you're an entrepreneur and you're going to look for money, first of all, is why do you want this money? Don't just do it because all the cool kids all get money from VCs. And that is unfortunately because of Shark Tank and other things that have occurred in the popularization of, looking at now old mature companies, Facebook and Google and everything else, as being, quote, sexy. Sometimes entrepreneurs think they've got to raise money from, quote, VCs because that's how I'm real. Well, it's not necessarily how you're real. You might be a lot better off raising money from customers, pre-buying something, or getting grant non-dilutive money. So don't just think, I need to raise money because that's what I need to do. Now, when you go to raise money and you decide how much you want to raise, particularly early on, the first time angels tend to invest, and you can replace an early stage investor, and that would include a micro VC, all these other, maybe crowdfunding, although that's a little bit of a different animal. But you've got to look and say, what do I need and what am I going to use this money for? Okay. And sometimes entrepreneurs will say, oh, I know raising money is hard, it's difficult, and I don't want to do this. So I'm going to raise $5 million today, so I never have to do this again. Well, the problem is, if you are raising $5 million at your first raise, and maybe all you have is a concept, or maybe you have a prototype, you have to give up too much of your company for an early stage investor to be interested, and that's not good for you. I think you have to understand not just your problem, and this is to a men and women entrepreneur, but what the solution is, why your solution is big enough that it can really work, and then why you are uniquely suited to do this. Women tend to round down, not round up. And I tell the story, you'll come in and you've got two startups, and one's led by a woman and one's led by a man, and they have 12 customers. Okay. Without blinking, typically the male entrepreneur will say, I'm on my way to 25 customers. And the female entrepreneur would be, well, I've managed to get just a little bit over 10 customers. Round up. Second thing is, how big is the market? Because you need a big enough market that's growing, or that is going to be growing. Because growth covers a lot of sins. It gives you the time to sort of figure out what the right product market fix is. Then is, what is your solution to this problem? So if you notice, that's typically number 3. Because if you step back about it, if you're going to waste your time and energy for a great solution, it better be for a market that's big enough to go after. And we are talking about companies that have the potential to eventually be, let's say, $100 million and have 50 plus more employees. Today there were 3 people or 4 people, but that's the trajectory you're looking at. If the whole market is only $300-400 million, it's just going to be too hard to grow. You're going to have to do too much, and there's not going to be a big enough reward at the end of the day. Because remember, most early stage investors, because they're coming in so early and they're going to be there so long, are looking for at least a 10x return. Now, why are we looking for a 10x return? Because only 1 in 10 of our companies is going to return any money at all. But we still believe when the day we write the check, we believe each and every company has that potential. So first of all, any company just starting out that doesn't have revenue and is really early and just getting the concept is probably worth something less than $5 million. I don't care what industry they're in, okay? Having said that, valuation is a negotiation between the entrepreneur and the investor. It is truly a negotiation. It is not the most important factor, okay? And way too much time is spent on this issue of valuation. And as an entrepreneur, what you need to say is, how much of the company can you give up now? Because you're going to do that calculation, what percent are you still going to own? Secondly, how will the money you are raising right now take you to the next major milestone, the next major inflection point? And what does that valuation have to be? Because you want to have an up round. Recognize that as an entrepreneur, it's really hard. What you're doing is hard. And make sure it's worth it to you. Okay? You're not doing this just to make a lot of money. You're doing this because you want to make a difference in the world.
Which brings us to the question of business model, right? This is something that I've seen, and sure you've seen founders struggle with. What are the common pitfalls you see in the founders that you see from a business model perspective, and what counsel would you give them for them to avoid these kinds of business model mistakes?
I think it's really about a bunch of things. It's figuring out what you think somebody would pay. That doesn't have to come from asking someone. They often won't really know, but it certainly can come from guesstimating comparables and alternatives. Sometimes the biggest competition is just status quo, getting people to move to try something new, right? What I find is more challenging often is developing an understanding of the cost of goods. And those are concrete things that people can figure out, but trying to really appreciate what margins are they going to need to be financially viable. And then the next part of that is in their go-to-market strategy, do they have to use expensive channels to get to these customers? A classic challenge with consumer products is when you go through retail, there's a huge part of the revenue that you give away. And so people try to come up with alternatives like packages and monthly shipments and things. So I think it's recognizing that you've got the end customer's willingness to pay, and then you've got all these elements that are in your path to before you can get there. Like take consumer products. One reason why investors and companies do well when they have a monthly subscription or something that's sticky. Razor blades example. You've got a product, but then you have a monthly service or subscription, something that causes that customer to remember you, to think about you, to be interacting in some way with your product or service. Sometimes, you can build really successful companies where the product has very little margin, but there's huge margin in all the add-ons. That's kind of fun.
This question of scale and growth are very intricately intertwined with how you're going to fund and how you're going to grow your business.
Mm-hmm.
So what have you seen in terms of founders who do this well? Should you be thinking about scale at the get-go? How should you be thinking about scale? And what are some sound practices for you to think about relative to the scale of where you want to get to?
Again, I'm going to go back to this bifocal thinking, and I'll give you my bias, which is not everybody's bias. I love to see companies figure out what it's going to take to get to the cash flow break even. not profitability. People talk about, I don't want you to make a profit. Anything that's beyond what you need, invest it back into the company. But I love to see companies be able to reach a point where you might hear the term optionality. The notion is, in theory, you don't have to raise more money. You can survive. You may want to raise more money to continue to grow, to scale, to whatever you need to do. I mean, capital, there's usually never enough capital. You always could do more with more, right? Even though we like, as with the entrepreneur's hat on too, to be able to gauge that. What am I giving up for that capital? How expensive is it? In a down market, you might want to hunker down a little bit. And if you're cash flow positive, just keep going, but not raise to scale until you can get your money at a better price. Or unless you think there's a competitor out there that may come in and take more market share in a down market. So you make the judgment decision to take more money, even though it may be expensive. But at least you're in a good position. If you're burning cash and you've got a runway of even 6 months, that goes quickly. 5, 4, 3, 2, like you're going to get more stressed and need the money. So you just end up paying a big premium for not having raised enough in a different value inflection points. So I think about scale as something that conceptually you're going to want to understand. At what volume level do your unit costs go down? And at what point do you have just the benefits of scale, of virality perhaps? What is that like? The scale that comes from AR, where it's a renewal, it's a renewal, it's a renewal. How do you make sure the customers are happy and focus on that? But that's very different than going after new customers from a cost perspective. It's always harder to get new than to retain old and existing. So just, I think, having the ability to be aware of the power of scale, and then what does that do to your business? So how do you have that compounding effect? And then you would be able to have a really good, exciting business model and plan that could be executed. And then I would pull back and say, okay, that's the goal. How do I get to where I'm in control of that? Ideally.
Is there a way for me as an operating founder to do things a certain way that will make it easier for due diligence to go more smoothly?
Absolutely. I mean, for example, let's start with the cap table. A cap table is so telling. One reason why I love to look at them right away is because it tells you, oh, you once had another co-founder. Who's Charlie Brown? You never mentioned this person. Oh, yeah, well, he left. Well, why does he have so much equity? You didn't negotiate an exit package? And we call that dead equity. Right? But it's things like that. I would say if we could back up to the beginning and do more coaching early stage or help with really good educational programs for entrepreneurs, it's start with the end in mind. So know what you're going to be asked and know how to build your company so that you've got all those I's dotted and T's crossed. And the discipline of that is so powerful. It's going to make it much more attractive to be acquired. You're going to have documents buttoned up from day one. And if there was ever a unhappy employee that left, having a document that they left, they signed, that kind of stuff. So I think it's basic business practices with employees and founders before you have employees and contractors and what contracting terms you agree to or taking money from a strategic but not giving them first right of refusal to your company for the next forever, things like that. I mean, I guess it's a really good question. How can we as an ecosystem do more to inform entrepreneurs at the beginning so that it isn't just, oh, come on, let's go build this. Let's just get an MVP going and we'll then raise money. Instead of, as Ron Weissman said, I'll give him full credit. I love this when he said, I want to see more MVBs, minimally viable businesses. Because, it's not just about the product. A person has to demonstrate that they're flexible, because in reality, I think investors know that whether you're talking about $500,000 or $1 million even, in the scheme of things, it's not going to make or break your return. It's not going to make or break the company. It might be emotionally important to the entrepreneur. So sometimes that needs to be taken into consideration. Sometimes it isn't really a material difference. But I do think one way an entrepreneur can manage that conversation is back to thinking about how much to raise at each round. So I once used this example with an entrepreneur who said, oh, they needed $5 million. They were raising $5 million. And I said, this was not in a formal setting. I said, well, that's interesting. The stage you're at, what do you think your company's worth today? Well, they didn't know. So I said, well, let me tell you the problem with just saying you need 5 million and you don't know what it's worth. Because if it's only worth 5 million and you raise 5,
You're giving up 100%.
yeah, exactly. And if you say it's only worth 5, and that might be a stretch at the stage, and you want 6, you've given up control. And I got this blank stare, like, oh, so you don't want to do that. Therefore, go back and think about how much money do you need, and then add a little bit more to get to a significant value inflection point. So that after you've got something you need to prove that takes risk away for the investor. And once you get to that point, then you can increase your valuation. And that amount of dilution that you take at the lower valuation isn't going to hurt you, the entrepreneur, because you're taking in only a little bit of money. So it's learning how to think in chunks so that you can protect yourself. You're helping that investor that's willing and ready to commit. And you're giving them the sense of, oh, I'm only going to raise so much. And if I want in, I better get in. And it's only, I'm only going to take in 500,000 or $1 million at this number. Then I'm going to go like crazy. And I'll come back to you if you don't want to take the risk now. Happy to come back in 18 months and prove X. I'm going to deliver this. Of course, the valuation is going to be higher. And then the investor has a nice decision to make. And also, depending on who's around that investment table, the investor might decide, one investor might say, I like this entrepreneur. I'm just going to put a little bit in. I want to be in on this. And another might say, you know what, that's fine. I like them too, but I'd rather wait. I don't like a safe note or this or that. I'll wait. I'd like to join you on the next round. Well, then they've built that relationship. They've got connective tissue. They're going to the next, it's all those things. So I think that certainly the entrepreneur can control how much they raise and how they use the money. But obviously easier said than done, because we'd all rather have far more money one time and done.
Before we dive back into our conversation, I want to tell you about Seed to Success. Seed to Success is our community letter with our proprietary insights on startup financial storytelling, tips, new episodes, and much more. If you find these discussions helpful in your entrepreneurial journey, use the link in the description to subscribe to Seed to Success today and get all of these and much more straight to your inbox every week. Now, back to our conversation.
So one of the things we question when a company comes to us to say we're raising 2 million, one of the questions we get serious about the company is 2 million the right number? Should they raise 1.5 or should they raise 3? And
it's not just, well, what's the cool number to raise for seed right now, but like literally both what gets you to the next market milestones and what gets you long enough in time and what buffer do you have. And the way you know what that is, you start playing with, okay, well, if they had more marketing money to, play with, how much would that change the output and the length of where they get and how many more customers would they get? Or if we couldn't afford to do all the product changes that they want to do in V1, and we just did this one, how would that change sales and uptake of that? And where would that get them? And so you need a model that's actually literally live, where changing marketing spend actually changes like ROAS, which is return on advertising spend, or it changes CAC, or it changes whatever. And that changes the number of products sold. And that then therefore changes the COGS, and therefore flows out to cash flow and revenue levels. And you can get a sense of, oh, shoot, like if we couldn't order that much inventory, like our minimum order quantity for a physical product is X. If they don't have that much money, they can't order any at all. It's very binary. And so, okay, they've got to have that much more. But if they spend that much, what happens to the rest of the cash flow? And, they run out of money this much faster, or they can last this much longer. And so we're looking for a model that both shows, like replicates the narrative story in the spreadsheet, shows that they know what the major levers are to show success of their business, gives them the right things to test against. If they're a seed stage company and they're going to go test a bunch of these things.
How long do you typically spend on these models? So you've had the first meeting, ask them to send in the model, they send in the model. Is it like a week? Are they sitting side by side with you?
It depends on how well the model is designed. So sometimes we open it up and we're like, oh yeah, okay, so they're not ready yet. Well, not to like throw a company under the bus, but once we had the timeline down the side instead of across, right? And if you've been in any sort of financial context, for whatever reason, historically, dates go across, and then like the different categories of expenses go down. And so this one was flipped, and I thought, okay, this company's really early. We got to like do some basic financial education, right? But sometimes we get just a static, like it is in Excel, but it's just hard coded content and it's not a working model. It's usually premature. Like the company, it's not just, that model wasn't good. It's like, the company isn't at a level of sophistication yet that they're really seed fundable. So we'll usually give feedback and be like, hey, come back to us when. And then if the model is well designed and self-explanatory, a lot of times we can go in there and play with it and do things like double expectations or shrink sales in half or do whatever and just get a sense of like the risk of sensitivity analysis and the risk profile and all of that. For better or for worse, if you are building a company and you're going to ask venture funds to come in, especially traditional venture funds, they have a timeline, and a traditional seed fund, for example, has a 10 to 12 year fund life, meaning I need to get all that money back to my investors within that time. And by the way, if I invested in your company in year 5, let's say I have a 5-year investment period. So the last investment I made out of my fund, I have a lot shorter window. I actually need you to invest to turn around faster because I don't have another 10 to 12 years from that date. I have 10 to 12 years total from the time my fund started. So even angel investors, they might have a longer timeline in some cases, depending on how old they are when they invest or whether the money is going back to them for their retirement, if it's going to their grandkids. But like usually the whole idea here is I'm going to need my money back. So I may love what you're doing, but like the point is it's a return on investment. By the way, most companies exit after a seed or series A. So like most of the time, that's not what happens. Obviously, if you think you're going to be one of those exceptions, put yourself in a different category. But otherwise, it helps you understand what stuff to build that's valuable. So if you think you're probably going to, if you're a med device, and really the point is to do enough clinical trials to like show that it's viable, and then you want Stryker or one of the other med device companies to buy you, probably don't build out a huge big HR department with all kinds of activities and things to like support a company for the next 20 years. If what you're doing is just getting it to the point where you've got a lab, you've got some clinicals, you got enough investors, you've proven the science and you're selling it, right? And so really think about what will the acquirers value and how do I build to there?
Got it. So are you seeing trends or anything that you think is noteworthy for founders to keep in mind in the healthcare sector in particular over the next 2 or 3 years?
Unfortunately, just that the later stage investors want to see more traction. I don't think that's just healthcare, but I was just at an event for women founders in health tech, and the investor panels basically all just echoed like, yeah, it used to be you only needed this much traction for Series A. Now you need this much more traction for Series A. And I have seen the same thing in CPG, for example. A lot of the investors who used to be, what we thought of as Series A investors are like, oh, wait till risk is out. We'll move up to Series B. And the seed investors were like, great, we'll move up to Series A. And so it's like these moving goalposts. And I think that's happening in a lot of sectors. And it's just a challenging time for startups who have to learn to be scrappy. And I don't envy that stage of a startup's life, but it is just the reality.
Women more so than anyone else, I imagine.
Resilient, though. Women are more resilient too. So I have faith in their ability, but it is a hard road.
There's a lot of excitement about the product, about launching, about the team, etc. And I understand that the legal part is not as exciting and sometimes boring and seems irrelevant at the moment because it's not tied to the actual product in the market. And I think there's something to say about that, where there's this mixed emotions of, do we need to get everything organized, or can we just hold off until the time is right? The unfortunate thing is that if you don't do things properly, that exit, some of the things you wish you had done, is going to come back, could show up and come back and bite you in the end, when it comes to taxes, when it comes to diligence, when it comes to responding to queries, and finding yourself running all over the place trying to figure this out and fix things, because it's not often like the big ticket items that hold up an exit. It's usually the small little things that companies find when they're trying to acquire you. And then it becomes like, you're getting this big paycheck. Did you strategically plan for it from a tax perspective and from the team perspective, et cetera? And so I feel like the common themes is a lot of excitement around the startup and things like that, and not very much attention paid to the actual structure processes that need to be in place from day one, really, ideally, but if not from day one, shortly thereafter, so that you are set up for success in the future. I think there's this underlying assumption that if they're going to raise money, that there's going to be an exit at some point, because that's what's in their pitch deck. That's what they're trying to explain, why people should invest in them, because it'll grow and they'll scale and they'll be able to do something with it. And so, like, while actually finding an acquiring party may not be in the immediate trajectory, it does tie into raising money. So like, these things matter even for just raising money, even in the amount of diligence that goes into certain types of investments that you take on is very similar to the diligence that will take place in an acquisition. So that same mindset has to apply there, and even if exit's not on your immediate horizon. And oftentimes startups, more immediate is the desire to raise money and then hopefully have an exit later on. So I would almost say that's a little bit interchangeable, because there's a lot of investors who like want to see everything buttoned up before they'll write you that check. Investing simply means you're not realizing the full value of the shares you received until some period of time or some conclusion of what is associated with those vesting terms. So those shares are yours, they're on reserve for you, but you don't get the full value of them until some future point of time. Time-based vesting is the most common, like you earn against it year over year, month over month, whatever you've decided. There's occasionally milestone vesting. People like to do that if to push for a launch, like, or first customer, that type of thing. So there's a lot of ways that vesting plays into it, but vesting is incredibly important for a variety of reasons. I would say the number one reason vesting is important when you have more than one person in a company is to show the commitment to the company and to each other. And so while you two founders could be best friends for lives, it doesn't mean they're best business partners. And you have a mechanism in a vesting schedule called a cliff period that allows people to make sure they're a good fit for the company for a period of usually a year before the first trigger on the vesting schedule starts.
If I'm a founder, let's say at pre-seed, what percent, like how do I look at the option pool relative to the overall ownership of the company? Is that 20%, 30%, less than that? Like, how does that relationship work?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say most often we try to keep it as close to 10% as possible. I don't usually recommend going beyond 15% at a pre-seed stage. And you kind of benchmark it based on what you're seeing your staffing going to look like and how much you're going to offer them. Because it could get recast in a potential future financing round, and that's fine. Or if you have enough options, that's fine too. But 10 to 15% is usually the benchmark for that. And then people's options come out of it. But like option, like the word option is really important here, because it's literally the right to purchase these shares into the future. It's not a grant of those shares on day one. And so the other thing that companies get hung up on, because they're like, wait, I don't want these people to have to pay for these in the future. Well, technically they're supposed to, because they have to create some basis in it. However, the value, the strike price of each share should be at an early stage rather low. So it should be like a nominal amount. As the strike price gets higher, however, then it becomes like a big decision as to what that will really look like. And so some companies will bonus their employees to help pay for it. Some companies will loan the money to help pay for it. Some people wait till the liquidation event to exercise so they can offset it with the money they're receiving. As you can see, a lot of this at the end of the day, beyond just like the numbers and what it means for people, there's a lot of perception value to all of this. And people like perception, like people want to give options of 10,000. They don't want to give options of 10. And the difference between 10 and 10,000 could be zero if there's only 100 shares of the company versus 10 million in the company. So it's a little bit monopoly arbitrary math at times, but perception is why people pick these bigger numbers, is because people always pick 10 million shares in their company or more because they want to give big round numbers to people. But it sounds like it just feels better than 25 versus 25,000. I would strongly recommend don't use only equity to incentivize the team. It should be some cash component plus equity for that particular person. If they are a W-2 employee, it has to be cash and equity. But if they're not, then you still should consider that as your marker. Make sure you're being mindful of how much you're offering them, and stay within some of these recommended percentages or do some research, because you do not want somebody to walk away with some change that you're not ready for them. And always, always, always use vesting schedules wherever possible, even if they're like better than gold, like you still, even like a 3-month vesting schedule, just to make sure that you're working well together after an agreement is signed. It can be done. Whatever the term is, it's worth it to you to make sure they're a good fit. So like always use a vesting schedule for these things. One thing I will add, since just as a cover to all this, because we did talk about one tax component earlier, is all of these shares, and we talked a lot about vesting and restricted stock and options. There's a tax form that kind of comes with it called an 83B election. Just remember those words, 83B, and make sure you look it up what it means, and that it's really important that gets addressed. What we try to push people to do is every year you have to renew your company wherever you're located, and use that date as the time to address these things. Like use that date to have your annual meeting. If you're working with us, we often try to include like just a frame template for you to fill in and keep. If you're working with other counsel, ask them to do that. Whoever your registered agent is, you have to renew the company every year. So use that as that point of time, calendar it, and just do your own little checkbox. Like, do I have all my contracts? Do I have all my employment agreements? Are there new members to the board? Anything changed? Just write it down. Even if it seems silly, like an agenda for that matter, a bullet pointed agenda, at least you've written it down and it's done. For me, the most practical time to think about it is when you're renewing your company, because they ask you, what is your address? Are there any new founders? Like, is your business still the same? Like different states ask different things, but it's an obvious time, I feel, to do that. The annual franchise tax for Delaware is due in February of every year. And so that's the same regardless of when you incorporated. So some people like to use that as their time to do that, because the franchise tax report in Delaware requires you to list all the shareholders, the number of shares issued, the gross assets. And so that's another great option. So like one of these two. So tie it to something functional you have to do for your company in renewing it. If you leave it out kind of in the abyss where it's like, when am I going to prioritize this? It won't happen. But if you tie it to something that you have to do to keep your company going, it is more likely to happen.
You said you taught yourself essentially through these boot camps or whatnot, how to put a business plan together. Was there any one thing that was particularly hard, or one turning point, or something that stands out about that business education part of becoming an entrepreneur?
Yes. And it's a very passionate topic for me, because I try to help other entrepreneurs through this. Because when you go talk to other business advisors, I'll call them, they'll always come at you with a bunch of things. Oh, you need a business plan. Oh, you need to assess the market size. What's your go-to-market strategy? What's your product market fit? What's your TAM, which is your lowest hanging fruit? What's your price point? What's your business model? What's your regulatory strategy? What is your reimbursement strategy? I mean, so it's not that I don't know that I got to answer these questions, but if you can lay out, help me think through what I should answer first, and how do I continue to create value in the company step by step that's suited to the technology I'm trying to bring to market, that'll go a long way. But don't give me an MBA 101 on what needs to be done. I can read on the internet. So this is the difference. is I got to understand what quilt you're trying to weave and help you put the pieces together. And I think that's what we struggled. It was overwhelming.
What was that vision and how did you articulate, in what terms did you articulate that vision?
Yeah. So I think the vision was very clear. It was the mission and how we meandered that actually struggled. So the vision was that this would be a non-invasive tool that would help cardiac patients everywhere get early detection, diagnosis, and treatment of life-threatening rhythm disorders, right? Very noble vision. And prior to my PhD, I'd spent a lot of time in India. I'm from Kerala, India. And my thinking very naively was, as a non-invasive technology, this would lend itself very well to the Indian market. And cardiovascular disease is also one of the leading causes of death in India as much as it is in the US. Just to put in perspective, the population of India and the incident is like 3 United States rolled into one, maybe even more today. So I just, in my mind, I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm in the US, I'm getting money from the US. I understand the US market and the FDA regulatory pathway is much more well-defined. Let me do this first here, and then I'm going to take this elsewhere. That elsewhere part never happened. And the reason is because we never had that in our mission statement, that we are going to have a strategy that would stepwise develop the innovation, the business models that would get it to these countries in a deliberate fashion. And instead, we follow the playbook for a typical invention that's invented on the Western world that will only reach the United States, Western Europe, Japan, and some parts of Asia. Not Southeast Asia, not India, not Africa, because none of them have reimbursed healthcare system. So the naivety there, or rather the lack of audacity there, was when you're starting as a pre-seed stage company, you don't talk about global expansion. That's naivety, right? However, my flawed thinking or limited thinking was that having developed something that was at a $3,000 per test price point has gone so far on the engineering end of the spectrum that in order for me to market this in a country like India, you have to go back to the drawing board. We didn't have funding by then. So that was the second gut punch. It was a 2009 market crash, 2008, 9, yeah. And we had arranged about $5 million of post-seed, or like now it would be called late seed. Then it was called Series A funding, and got hires and everything ready to go. Then Ping had the heart attack and the funding disappeared because they decided to reinvest in their own portfolio companies. So here I was, no co-founder, and I can't hire anybody because the money disappeared. But so 2 negative pivotal moments. Not all pivots have to be positive, right? And then the third one was we had just returned from a conference in San Francisco in May, a very significant conference for us called the Heart Rhythm Society. And one of the cardiologists there had seen us speak about this device at a talk. He's a French cardiologist, and he reached out and he said, I've always seen this work, and I didn't realize that this was coming to the clinic soon. I'm very interested in doing studies with you. And I want to test this device. I'm very interested in it. And so I said, okay, I'll tell you that I have one device and there's only one person that can operate it, me. And then he said, well, why don't you come over next week? And I said, no, I can't come over next week. I don't even have a visa. I'm not a US citizen, all the things. And then he said, no, I can't take no for an answer. I'll give you 2 weeks. You got to come. Bring everything you got. We'll arrange cases for you. I want to see how this device works. And I said, when are you going to get all the regulatory approvals in your hospital? Next day, he said, the regulatory approvals are all done. And I said, well, I don't have a visa. He said, book your ticket. And I said, I'll book my ticket, but they're going to ship my passport to my house. So then he said, you're just bringing up these mundane difficulties. And I said, okay, fine. I'll just go to the consulate in Chicago. I'll book a ticket from Chicago to come to Bordeaux, France. And if I don't get it, then I won't be able to come. So be prepared for that. And he is like, fine. So I went to the consulate and they clearly enough, she said, you can't do this. We don't, 2 weeks, you will ship your passport home, blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, I have a ticket this afternoon. And she said, like, don't you read on our website our regulations? And then I said, well, Dr. Haitsegar said that I should, do it this way. And this is the number he asked me to call. So they called him and he said, I have 11 patients for Dr. Ramanathan that will wait for it just because you don't have time to put a stamp on her passport.
Wow.
And they did. And I flew. Went to French customs and they're like, what is all this equipment? Where's your paperwork? Don't have any, because I didn't even think to get the customs paperwork describing medical equipment coming in from the US to France. And I said, I don't know. I act like a very naive person, which I was. It was easy. It wasn't really acting. They let me in and said, never, ever do this again. So I took all my equipment. I went, we did 11 cases back to back. I was exhausted at the end of it because we did 2 cases. I analyzed the data because we didn't even have a commercial software at the time. Went back. And then he said, I want you to write a report of all these cases and I want you to send them to me. And I won't tell you the results of it because I want to see if your device works. So I sent him a report in late July with all everything, pictures, nicely done. And next day he called me and he said, I want to be involved in your company. I have investors.
Wow. So,
and this precise question was, will you allow me to invest and be involved in your company? And so the next, I would say 2.5 years, almost 3 years, we were very comfortable and very aggressive because we didn't have to keep on going back and raising capital. And we were so efficient that we returned $12 million of their money.
Doesn't surprise me with you being a woman founder at all, but kudos on that.
Yes, but nobody talks about it, right? Like everyone talks about, we raised $100 million when I could do it in 10. No, we got 30. We did it in 12 less. I mean, I know this is counterintuitive, and I actually heard in a seminar recently, never bring all these touchy points first because the deal may fall apart. I feel the opposite. If you don't say, if I say like, look, I'm going to deliver, there's no doubt about it, but I'm also going to ask you for certain things that I'll make it worth your while to deliver, but I'm going to ask you for certain things and I need them. And putting that up front will result in one of 2 binary outcomes, I feel. One is they will respect you for it and they'll be like, okay, tell me what's on your mind. Or second, they'll go back and say, this woman's trouble. She's never going to listen to us and walk away, which is a good thing because you're now going to not waste your time 8 months negotiating a deal where they come back and say, and then they put you in a worse corner, right? Because you have 8 months spent time on this relationship that you've lost elsewhere. So address the elephant in the room. If there are certain expectations and you feel that this is what it's going to take for you to feel good, bring it up. Most often than not, you will walk out of there with a lot of respect. So step number 1 is believe in yourself. You'll hear a lot of things, but sometimes it's okay to be foolishly optimistic. So that's number 1. I think women need to take an optimism pill every morning and say, I am awesome, right? Number 1. Number 2 is get that stage, like get that 1 or 2 mentors that you can go to, because there'll be moments when you want to pour your heart out and share. You want someone that says, I've been there. And it helps to have someone of your own gender and preferably similar socioeconomic background so they can be empathetic with you. So that's really step number 2. And step number 3 is like, don't be afraid to ask for help. For example, for the longest time, I had trouble admitting that women were unfairly treated. I was unfairly treated because admitting that meant like I had a weakness of some sort, or I am admitting that I've been, I'm less or something like that. And I talked to a lot of women and that also corroborated the sentiment. So like, I think it's okay to ask for help. You don't have to be a hero. I know we're asked to be heroes in multiple facets of our life, right? Like raising children, raising families, whatever it is. I think when it comes to startup, it does take a village, and make sure that as women, we're surrounding ourselves with the right village and asking for help. And I would highly recommend a co-founder.
Nobody cares what you did before. All they care is that you didn't get fired. Maybe these days it is a good thing to get fired, but I had worked for 2 companies in 12 years. That was a very good track record. More than that, they were only interested in what space I was in, why was I in it, what do I think would happen. I had a little more knowledge than them. Any new space in technology, especially, that entrepreneurs, their lives depend on that. They dive in. In fact, VCs are learning from entrepreneurs, and that happens all the time, even today. So be mindful of it. Don't put yourself too much below VCs to pitch to them. They are going to get value out of it. That's why they are talking to you. And you are going to get money from that. But it is like, if you're not going to get money from them, don't be so desperate, would be my only message.
Looking back, what is the one thing that stands out in this whole journey to you as a person?
The learning.
The learning. And what about the learning? Is it the process
The
of learning?
learnings were the experience that you go through at every step shapes you, changes you, builds you up for the rest of your life. And that learning changed me in such dramatic way that I wouldn't have changed if I had worked for somebody else for 50 years. And there is something about running a company that I think that people miss out on, is the owner's mindset. You do everything. There is nothing, no pomp, no show. It is reality, and you do it with an owner's mindset. So even now, when I sit on a number of not-for-profit boards, when I said, let's think about what the owner of this company would be thinking about, not what makes us look good, what makes the next year look good. So owner's mindset is what I have, which I would have never learned. When you're in that hot seat for 20 years, how can you not get it?
Got it. And then looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently, knowing what you know now?
I actually think that looking back, I think I was daring, and I did the right things by continuing to roll the dice. I rolled the dice 3 times, starting a company, then privatizing the company, and then shutting the company. So it was a journey, and I think net I came out far ahead financially. I could have come out more ahead had if rolling the dice had worked the second and the third time, but it did not. But you are going to suffer falls anytime, and you brush your knees, you get up. Sometimes it takes longer. Some experiences are worse than the other experiences, but you learn to get up and get going again because, and overall, it was a journey that I would not give up for anything. I would say the one thing that I have, if I examine my own life, I've learned is that you have to take a deeper dive within and find what that purpose is at different moments in time. What are you trying to achieve? What is bothering you? All these things have to culminate. So I am, for example, for the last almost 20 years, 19 to be more precise, I have been not working for money. Given all that, I think listening to yourself, listening to your instincts is important. And I put it also in terms of women in general are not taught to do that. They are always looking for endorsement of other people. And we say, well, they lack confidence. But what is this confidence? The confidence to me means that we can do it. Listen to yourself. You are not going to work your life with somebody else's brain. You got one brain and one only brain. So that's how I work. That's how I operate my life, even now.
This whole point you brought up of 2 things, actually. One is do the work and don't worry about the results. And the other thing is be seen and not heard, right? So in some sense, they're antithetical, I would argue, to the American way of doing things, which is, hey, you have to be results driven. Everything is about the outcomes, which is very different than do the work and let the outcomes be what they are. Was that ever a conflict? And how did you reconcile that? And then secondly, to those of us who have been brought up in the be seen and don't be heard, don't rock the boat, be humble, be self-effacing. How do you overcome that inner programming and find out who the real you is versus the conditioned you is, especially if you're being brought up in a culture or an environment which says, be humble, don't rock the boat?
Shubha, you are asking very complicated questions. I've reflected on these things quite a bit, so I do like them. So what can I say about it is seen and not heard. Who is real you and who is the outwardly you? I think as we go through our experiences, we learn about who the real me is. It does tell you. And I think the ultimate is becoming, you have arrived when you feel comfortable in your own skin. Then you know that you have gained the confidence for which you were striving for. You know that the only person you recognize and can retain in your internal and outwardly outlook is the real you. The pretend goes away. It was a varnish which entered your head. It gets ingrained by different people, whether they are your parents or teachers or society, your co-workers, all those things. So I think listening to your instincts, the art of listening to your instinct is what we need to develop. And the only way we can develop, in my mind, or the way I developed, is by saying, whose brain am I going to think with? My brain. That's all I have. That's been powerful, but it is not easy to practice.
So in conclusion, what words of wisdom would you offer to either a younger version of yourself or to other women just starting out this journey?
Be you. Just try to be you.
What does it mean? So I'm going to challenge you on that. So what does it mean to be you?
Be you means don't do anything which looks artificial, that you have to struggle to portray yourself. If you are projecting yourself the way you are, others will come to you or engage with you. I think engagement is something we need in professions as well as social life. And if we can be ourselves, people find us more interesting. People believe us more. They trust us more. And job becomes far easier.
Well, I think there's a North Star for me, and I actually think it's probably for everybody, where you know when you like something and you know when you don't. You just have that internal compass that tells you this feels good, this doesn't feel good. And I know it seems very rudimentary, but just as you navigate your career, if you're in a situation that doesn't feel good, navigate away. And if you're in a situation that feels really good, navigate towards. And I just have never really stayed in a situation that I've been unhappy with for very long. It was never one idea. It was never thought out from the very start. It was, again, being on a journey, adapting. I started as a classroom teacher, and we started in a very non-committal way where we rented this was his idea too, rented a local high school's computer lab for spring break when school was out, and offered classes on the new internet. And somebody came from Vienna, Austria, which pretty much blew our minds because it's very beginning of the internet, it's international, but you don't realize you're going to publicize a class and someone's going to come from another country. You just don't realize the power of it. And so that success gave us the encouragement to rent a space and start an ongoing classroom. And then that was very, very successful. And I was still writing books, and I hadn't even started recording videos yet. 9/11 happened, and then people stopped traveling. Our business dried up. We had to figure out another way. So it was really a little bit out of adapting to how do we stay alive to think about publishing our own materials, which ended up being to publish videos at the time, VHS cassettes, which don't even exist anymore. And, putting the videos online was also another huge risk, and nobody had done that. And all of our competitors were selling physical VHS tapes, and we'd created this library idea, and you subscribe. And it was very early on in subscription businesses. There were so few of them. So we just pioneered a lot of things out of adapting to our circumstances. And it was not a big master plan that was going to lead to selling our company ever. We're just not a typical startup at all, in that we never even sought investment. We bankrolled our own company from book proceeds. We were making royalties on the books. And that was what we reinvested in starting a classroom and starting a video publishing company. And so we were not ever really even aware of some of the things that you learn in business school and metrics. But we were looking at our own metric, and our own metric was, can we pay our bills? Can we pay our employees? I think you'll talk to any founder who's been through that process, and it's founder syndrome, where suddenly you're not in control, even if you've kept the controlling, we had kept the controlling shares, and really didn't realize when we took on our first investors that we were going to lose control over our CEO. And, really his goal at that moment, once we had investors, was to have a spectacular outcome, either go public or sell a company. And that became the driving force. That had never been the driving force of our company. So it really changed the ethos, and it changed the entire organization. And, it was very hard on myself and Bruce, because I just don't think we had seen that coming, even though we probably should have. We knew when we took on investment that they're not doing it out of kindness. This means you're going to have an exit. But we didn't realize it was going to mean that we lost control. And we did. And it wasn't fun, but no one was going to cry us a river. I think there was, I at the time had regret that we had put someone in the position of CEO. But when I really look back on it, he helped us. There's just absolutely no way we would have grown the way we did without his expertise. And it was very compatible and friendly and really magical for many, many, many years. And I think everything worked out the way it was supposed to, but it doesn't mean it was all fun and it was all pretty. And I think that's probably the story of every company that sells. And I think we tend to romanticize times. And memory is an odd thing. I actually think things worked out the way they were supposed to. We were sheltered from a lot of the parts of business that neither of us would enjoy. And we were sheltered because we created a company that was successful enough where we could hire the people to do the things that we weren't good at and we didn't want to do. It's not like we were sheltered by some magic potion. We created the sheltering on purpose, because that's what you really should do. You should do the things that you want to do and you're good at, and let other people who want to do those other things and are good at those other things do those things. And that's the way, ideally, the world works best. All I would say is just go in with your eyes open. When you take on investment, you are going to lose control ultimately, whether you do in the very beginning or you do towards the very end. The decision is that you're going to let your company be either sold or you're going to go public. You're going to ultimately lose control. When you're having good times, I always would say, if you're not going to do these things during good times, when are you going to do them? And how are people going to really believe you when it's a bad time? But this is the sad thing about our world. It's just the profit extraction, just being the primary goal and not really thinking about quality, not really thinking about interactions and how people interact with your company, your employee. It's like a 360 thing. It's your staff, it's your customers, it's your vendors, it's your administration. It's above and below and to the side and to the right and to the left. And it's everything. you have to walk the walk or you're not going to be believed. I would say that when you're starting off, you have to fake the confidence before you have it, because you're not going to walk in having wealth. So you're not going to walk in the door having monetary success. There are many other things that you need to have, but one of them is confidence in your ideas. And I think maybe that's something I've always been good at, is sort of faking confidence before I had it. They call it fake it till you make it, And I used to think, I'm just had this memory of when I was just out of college and kind of struggling in my 30s. And I used to think, like, if I woke up and I was feeling really down, well, I'm just going to really get dressed up and kind of like fake that I feel good and really try to put forward a better appearance than how I'm feeling inside. And I don't know why I had that instinct, but I do think that women have to, what I have observed in my own career, and I hope it's not as true as it once was, that I've always felt like I had to be better than a man, to even be at the level playing field.
And that's a wrap for today. Thank you for tuning in. If you find these conversations helpful in your own journey, please subscribe to Seed to Success, our weekly community letter with tips, insights, resources, and more. If you have any other questions relating to startup finance or financial storytelling, send them over to me at chakras@achieve.co. That's chakras@achiiv.co. We'll see you on the next episode of Invisible Ink. Now, go achieve.